Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're located. Welcome back to Practical Inclusion. I did have a bit of a hiatus last week, perhaps the week before too. I'm not sure. Like many, this year is really getting out of control as we race to the finish. But thank you for joining in, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching through the replay. I'd like to start, as always, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I live, work and play on, which is the land of the Wadawurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and a big call out to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining us today, but also to Indigenous peoples across the world, because today we are so fortunate to have an international guest on the show again, which is just super exciting for me. So as the tradition on this show, I will absolutely hand over to the guests to introduce themselves through their story. Sunitha, it's such a pleasure to have you on here today. We've already had a great little intro conversation that I can't wait to have publicly. So if you would do us the pleasure of telling us a little bit about what you do, but really what's your story? How did you become a diversity and inclusion consultant and futurist, which is something we're going to talk about today as well?
Thank you so much, Ree. Thank you. So hi guys, my name is Sunitha Vikram, and I always think about my stories unusual because I was given every opportunity that you can imagine. It came out of the uni. I've been to the private schools, I've been to colleges around the world, the top 100, a couple of the top 100 colleges in the world. And it's interesting because even despite of that, I've had quite a challenging time remaining in the workforce as a woman, trying to climb. I'm a high careerist. I'm an unapologetic, aspirational careerist, and despite that, I've come across places where my career has hit a wall, and I've had to think, how am I going to get over this wall, around this wall? And I think that's probably my biggest leeway into the work I do now, which is in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but with a primary focus on women's leadership. In addition to that, my mother has a very severe psychiatric condition. And she's had it for over 30 years. And I then also married somebody with the same severe psychiatric condition. So I have also very close to my heart an intention to speak about mental health. And I think these two closely overlap as women have so much pressure on them to achieve in all aspects, and then the toll it has when they don't self-care for themselves. So one of the biggest things that actually we talk about in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, we go into corporates and talk about is self-love. And we think that everything begins with self-love. Can you embrace the good, the bad, the ugly, and the monstrous? And in doing so, and embracing it for yourself, and then embracing it for other people, what could change? What possibilities could arise from that?
Wow, what a beautiful way to start us off. And I think what you've done there too is connected us to, which is something that we had in a previous conversation recently, connected this mental health idea to diversity and inclusion, which we were talking about. And I'm not sure what it's like in India, but certainly in this country, the wellbeing strategy or the mental health strategy for an organisation is often quite separate to the diversity and inclusion work, sometimes even held by totally different departments or divisions. Do you see that too? And do you see that is perhaps potentially a bit problematic when it comes to really true diversity and inclusion work?
Absolutely, because I think maybe in the last 10, 15 years, people are talking about mental health. And it's still something that, when I tell people, like my mom is sick and now she's got dementia and this and that, I still get a lot of blanks. I realize the intention is that they want to listen, they want to understand, but they just don't know how to respond, And more and more, especially in the middle of COVID, where there was a huge mental health fallout, I think at that point, everyone woke up and we did multiple. We must have reached 15,000 people that we talked to, especially with women, especially when it talked about your emotional, physical health, but it came as a reaction to COVID, and it was not something that people have talked about for long enough and deep enough beforehand. So we've already seen the fallout, and I think it's the same globally. Women leaving the workforce, women having a mental health condition or mental health setback during this time. So absolutely. I mean, I wonder what would happen. In fact, yesterday I was running something on mental health, and I was asking, what would happen if we had a buddy at work who looked after our mental health, who was our, what would happen? Every day I'd come into work and my buddy would say, Sunitha, it's time to leave. Go home and take care of yourself, be with your family. What would be my incentive? What would happen to my motivation? What would happen to my level of engagement at work, if that was the case? And again, I think this is where the intersectionality happens, being a woman and then having the additional toll of being the primary caregiver. That's what happened in COVID here in India and again around the world, because when women were at home without their support system, they were taking everything. They had to work, they had to look after their children. And in India, we live in a joint family, so we had to look after our elderly parents / in-laws as well.
And so there's like this added kind of double and triple and potentially quadruple workload that then gets, and what you're describing is that got left on the shoulders of women.
Absolutely. And again, I can't say it enough. We didn't have this conversation early enough, So now we're just facing the fallout. And so I think there's two things that we do there. One, we talk to the women and say, what, no matter what, we see you like this house and you are the base of the house. Often in India, women are looking after, and again, around the world, are looking after the home, looking after the family. And you've got to strengthen your base. You've got to look after yourself. And that's how we're not looking at just 1 or 2 years. We're looking at you having to support in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, next 15 years. And then we always also tell women, what, don't wait for somebody else to do it. Don't wait for other people. Look at your self-limiting beliefs, right? And women, we're often talked about the glass ceiling. We don't actually believe in a glass ceiling. For everybody who talks about a glass ceiling, there's an Angela Merkel, there's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. There are people who go out there and it's just something within you. We do a lot of inner work to say, what are those resistances and those barriers? And how can you think about not changing them, because change always seems like that, just transforming them, just gently looking at them, observing them, and being in your awareness to see what could be different.
Interesting. We haven't had that conversation before on this show. I think most people who I've spoken to have been quite strong in the belief that the glass ceiling exists, and I must admit I'm one of those. I'm interested in your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, I think that I'll take myself as the example. When I want it, I will get it. I'm a pretty strong woman. I will find my way. I will navigate. I will network, and I think about several things. I'll give you an example. There was a time when I had to leave work, and I had to take a year and a half out. I went and studied yoga, and I thought that's the end of my career. There's like a bunch of stuff that I hope, and I couldn't travel. I became a single parent. All this stuff happened. And then I thought to myself, no, I want to go back to the workforce. And I found it. I found a place where I became the head of leadership development for 30,000 people. And I just didn't give up. I went out, I networked, I wrote to people. And I did good. I would never have thought after a year and a half break that I would find that. And I think there's just this point, and I actually think women have quite a lot of it. And they say, I want to make it happen, and I will. And just finding the resources. And by the way, those resources are all within you. Once you make that decision, the resources are within you to be able to navigate that. And of course, you're going to have setbacks. But I don't believe in a world, Brie, where I'm going to walk down the road and someone's going to give me self-empowerment. No one's going to hand that to me. I'm going to have to do my inner work to be able to overcome those mindsets. And like I said, I have this actually study something called neuro-linguistic programming, and that says if one person can do it, anyone can do it. So if Angela Merkel can do it against the odds, I can do it, and I just have to believe in myself to be able to reach that point.
Yeah, okay. I absolutely can see can see that for sure. I guess the challenge for me is thinking about the systemic barriers that exist that some people just can't necessarily jump over, or can, but as you say, it takes a lot of work and effort, whereas for others it might be easier for them to get through.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in, we had a quick chat before, and I'm really interested in the state of diversity and inclusion in workplaces in India. Are you able to kind of paint a picture for us? Because I know I've got plenty of listeners who are global, but there's also the majority who would be Australian and not quite conscious of where diversity and inclusion is at in India.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that's happened during this last year and a half was the Black Lives Matters movement. So what happened was a lot of larger multinational corporations where they had headquartered in the US, came into India and said, you know what, we're going to plug and play our D&I charter into India. So that there began the onslaught and the interest in D&I. So we saw a pickup during that time, but many of the responses that came from our D&I partners within our clientele said that, you know what, it's never going to work. We can't plug and play. Like the whole conversation on D&I, like when it comes to the US, it's about race, right? So we said, okay, well, what can we do? And by the way, in India, we've recognized, I think we have like 33 different kinds of unconscious bias, right? Because we're highly diverse, North India, South India, institutional, religious barriers. So there we began the conversation. So then a lot of companies are like, well, why do we need to do this? And I was telling you before, Bree, right? So in India, we are 50% of our population is below the age of 28, and 65% of our population is below the age of 32. And we're looking at a burgeoning number of people. And by 2027, we're going to be the biggest workforce in the world. We're going to be over 1 billion people. And I think China is just a shade under us at 900 million, right?
Okay.
So what would happen? So first of all, when you're producing a cutting edge service and product, when you're designing that, you're designing it for a group of people who are probably millennials, right? So when I go into workforces, I look at leadership teams, even if I see what you call it, gender representation, I don't always see a generational representation, right? So we're looking into a future where the next CEO or your next manager, it's already happened to me. My last manager is only a couple of years older than me, and I'm seeing the next person who if I go back to full-time work, would be much younger than me, you know, and they have a completely different kind of mindset. And I'll give you an example. My son, who's 13, declared himself a feminist, and if he becomes a manager somewhere, he's going to say, just get the women on board, make it happen, or leave. There's not this conversation. Like I have tons of conversation. Why should we have more women? Why should we have more diversity? I'm not going to I actually don't want to have that conversation. I'll be happy if I don't have to have that conversation.
Yes,
I'll be like, I'm going to go and study yoga now or something. I don't know, you know. But I'm still having this conversation. And in fact, I'd gone to a very large pharmaceutical company where it was the commercial sales part of their business, and they were like, you know, I was sitting with the national sales director. There was 11 or 12 of them, only men, right? And they're selling whatever their pharmaceutical products, and they're asking me why, and I'm like, well, first of all, there's 49% representation of women. So if you want to sell, I don't know, a gynecological product or a product for children, you need women as your target, but you've got all these men going in. So, you know, we spend a lot of time saying, okay, there's social justice, there's the right thing to do, but we're really not there in that conversation right now. So instead, we talk a lot about the end clientele, who, you know, is X, Y, and Z, 50% men, women, whatever, so much generational. Is your leadership team able to produce your output to cater to that thing? So we link it to a business objective. Again, something I don't wish I had to do, but that's a good way to move my charter, move my agenda, which for me, again, comes from, to me, that just seems like the right thing to do. Why can't I have a Muslim woman from the northeast of India? If she's got the capability, she's got the skills, she's got the competencies, I should hire her. I should not be thinking, will she get married? Will she have children? Will she have maternity leave? I should just hire her.
Yeah, I love this conversation because, you know, people sit on people have a lot of opinions about this, particularly when you push forward that business case of diversity. And I've had people say to me, you know, that's really demeaning. You shouldn't be talking about it in that way. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And the reality is, sure, in a perfect world, but we live in a capitalist society. And if we want to see change, we have to really drive into those business benefits that are just so fortunate that they exist. For me, it's this great lever that we can use to really create societal change through the workplace by recognizing the benefits that we get from doing this work in the corporate world. So yeah, I love the way you've articulated that. Do you find, so you've talked about some challenges from a demographic perspective and bias perspective in India. Is gender still the key thing, or is it more around some of those other biases that you were talking about? What focus are organisations having?
Yeah. So I would say that because D&I is in the nascent stage, in the small, medium enterprises, so that's the SMEs, right? In the larger companies like the JP Morgans and the Citibanks and the Standard Chartered banks, you know, they've got it going on. They've got a central team, and they're already talking about this. So much of the work I do, in fact, we started our company thinking it was gender is going to be women's leadership, and then we realized, okay, that there's a much bigger picture, and we want to cater to that picture. But predominantly, the conversation is about leadership, and so there are three. So we in the area of gender, there's three pots. One, there is hiring. So, for example, again, hiring, like that company I was talking about, where you're a medical rep, you're on the road, you're alone, it's safety. People feel like, okay, I'm not really sure. As a woman, do I have the like you said, the external resources? Is the bus safe? You know, if I have to go late at night into the warehouse, is it safe? So there's one part of that pot, which is hiring, and often there's not even enough supply. There's not enough people who are, you know, if you know what it's like, if it's not STEM, right? I mean, sorry, if it's STEM jobs, there's not even enough supply to do the hiring. So how are you going to do that when the market doesn't have it? And then another part of that is retention. So they come in, they're great, and then bam, they get pregnant, and then it's like, okay, then I step back. I'm not going to ask for the high visibility job. There's no mother's room. How do I manage? So there's retention, and then the last part of it is growth. Growth is where talking about senior leadership, and again, we're looking at, I don't know, depending, like if it's manufacturing, it's like 5 to 10% representation of women. It's on, I think globally it's 20%. In India, again, it'll be 20% is good, and then you will see a percentage that's lower than that. So the conversation is happening on gender. And again, what's happened is, if you have a headquarter elsewhere, they've said, you know what, you've got to make this happen. You've got to increase the percentage. You don't have a choice. And then there is a business need, and then they come to us.
Yeah, beautiful. And can you tell us a little bit more about your women's leadership programs? Because I'm really interested in the way you run them. It seems quite different to other programs that I've seen or heard of. And I'd love you to talk about your philosophy there.
Yeah. So, you know, I think we recognize that the women's leadership journey is highly circuitous, you know, so we have to have children. We don't have to have children, but if we have children, if we have to look after our family, then, you know, it takes a different turn. So what we did was we put together a program called the Feminine Leadership Journey. And it starts with one half of it with the inner work, right? So the inner work starts with a module on self-love. So we think that this is the biggest problem. You know, when we have the inner rhetoric that says, I have an inner rhetoric, I will not speak for everyone, that, you know, I'm not tall enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not enough, you know, whatever. It just goes on and on. No matter how many promotions I get, no matter what I look like, whatever I do, I still have this inner rhetoric, a highly self-critical narrative. So a lot of the work, you'd be surprised, we go into corporations and we talk to women about self-love. Can you embrace all part of you? Can you give yourself self-compassion? Can you give yourself self-understanding? Even before that, do you even hear your inner narrative? I didn't hear my inner narrative till I was 40. I was practicing yoga and I was like, oh my God, this person inside my head, I would not be her friend, you know? So we start with that conversation. So we talk about self-love, and then we talk about self-empowerment. Say, what do you want? You know, you want to become the CEO, make all the choices to get you to that place. You want to be, I don't know if you have this in Australia, it's called being a maintenance career. You just stay in that certain level of leadership, and you decide, you know, you don't want to go any. So, you know, maybe you want that. Maybe you want to be a stay-at-home mom. It's beautiful. Do that. But be aware that you are making that choice, right? And make all the choices that lead up to what is your goal. So, again, self-empowerment. I'm going to empower myself. I'm not going to wait for Brie. I'm not going to wait for my mom or my dad or my husband. I'm going to empower myself and I'm going to be the sum of all the choices that I make. And I take ownership end to end. What's happened to me, and particularly what's not happened to me. So that's all the inner work we do. And then we talk about self-leadership. Again, now I know what I want. I know what is my strength and maybe what the team needs, what my organization needs, and then think about how can I flex myself? Maybe I'm a high introvert and I'm leading a bunch of high extroverts. Where do I need to flex myself? How can I lead this team knowing that this is my strength? It's a beautiful strength I have. It's a beautiful strength. And where can I flex myself? And then it ends with self-mastery. So self-mastery is, you know what, COVID's going to come and go. All the worst things are going to happen and the best things are going to happen. Are you upping your ante? Are you always looking to where to sharpen your skills, your capabilities, your competencies, and looking how to move forward? Knowing someone like me, I want to be the master of women's leadership. I want to be the master of knowing how to talk about diversity in any organization or any forum that I get an opportunity to do so. So that's our 4-step journey.
Yeah, I like it. And people who are watching will and who are familiar with me know that I'm not a huge advocate for women's leadership programs, but I also 100% recognize too the differences that exist between cultures and countries and also the state that diversity and inclusion is at in different places and the value of leadership programs. And it's certainly something that I speak very openly about, that I think everybody should go and do a leadership program. And I think, you know, particularly if you're a woman and you look to a leadership program that is specifically for women and that's what makes sense for you, then absolutely do it. My issue around women's leadership programs is when corporates or organizations choose that as their only diversity and inclusion piece of work. And I find that problematic because we're focusing on fixing the people, not fixing the systems. I think the organisations should focus on the systems and certainly do those leadership programs as well if that makes sense, but also recognising that they have a role to play as well, and it's not just about self-empowerment. So I just want to put that out there because I'm very public in that particular position, but I love what you're describing there in terms of the self-empowerment and the self-love. I think that's such a valuable thing for people to be spending time reflecting on and owning and changing that narrative.
Yeah. So I want to add here, I wanted to add here that, so there's 2 parts of our business. So one is the people business. Obviously, I take care of the people business. I talk a lot about it. And then we also have the process. So what happened was the process part, you're absolutely right, Brie. It's never going to change if I keep on talking to the women or whoever, LGBT, persons with disability, and I don't ensure that the system supports them. So what we did was we studied D&I and we came up with an 8-step framework. And it starts with a inclusion audit. And then so the inclusion audit, I'm speaking to the choir here. It's like a health check. It's like, I'm going to have a full health check. And then now I know my sugar is low. I need to take medication, diabetes, and I need to take so much. By the way, I'm a scientist. That's how I speak like that. So we start with an inclusion audit, and then we have certain steps. We want to have it to be completely process driven. So often what happens is people come to us and talk about women's leadership, and then we try and fit it into our 8 steps. So we talk to the leadership team, we look at processes, policies. Absolutely. We had a company where every time you get promoted, you have to move city. But actually, you know what? That doesn't work for the women. So we look back at the policies, we redid the policies. So we look at, and then we also look at educating. So that part of that is where I come in and run the workshops. So we have a robust, time-tested, research-based 8-step process because it's never going to work until we only talk to the people. I absolutely agree.
Love it. I'd love to learn more about that process. It sounds absolutely spot on, and it sounds like we're talking the exact same message. You've got to do both. You can't. It's like the old idea that we'll just focus on hiring for diversity, but we're not going to do the inclusion bit. That'll fix itself when we get a more diverse workplace. You've got to have a 2-pronged attack.
Yeah. So what happens is, we when people come to us, they only talk about the people. That's probably why we've had a lot of conversations. And then we have to slowly move them to the process. Like, so we say we're obsessed with outcome. So when we do the 8-step process, we're like, what is your outcome? Let us measure this. Let's see where the needle moves, because it's not going to work otherwise. So we spend, but it takes some time. As I said, it's in the nascent stage, and I think it's going to move. India is very embracing to change. We're a country that will change overnight, but it's veering towards that conversation, but keeping in mind, we're like, okay, you want to spend all this money on women's leadership, great, but where is the needle moving? We want to see outcome, we want to see evidence. Otherwise, it's not going to work, and it's not actually great for you either to spend all that money and not see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, awesome. Excited. I'm excited by the work you're doing. It's been so wonderful to chat with you, and I hope we get another chance to chat. Actually, I think I'd like to chat offline and learn a bit more about the work that you do. So thank you for sharing your story with us, but also your approach to this work, and giving us that context about diversity and inclusion in India for those who aren't familiar, because I certainly wasn't familiar with where things were at. And I love that you say that that India changes quickly, and it'll be fascinating to watch this space in the next probably 2 to 5 years rather than 5 to 10 years, and see what comes of it. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thanks everybody for listening in again. As always, I wrote a post this morning about professional dress that seems to have got a little bit of traction and a little bit of controversial discussion around it. So please check that out. Let us know your thoughts and comments around it. I am a really strong advocate for dropping this idea of professional dress. To me, it's incredibly patriarchal, colonial, all the rest that goes along with that. And really that we know that people do their best when they can bring their authentic selves to work. And the more we can empower people to do that, the better. And an easy way to do that is drop our expectations around professional dress. So I think it's an important thing to be thinking about as we move. For those of us in Australia, Sunitha, we're kind of at the point where we're moving back into the workplace. People are doing hybrid models and a whole range of different things. And so it'll be really interesting to see how this continues as people have been used to working in their tracksuit pants. But I will leave it at that. If you're interested in joining up with my Diversity and Inclusion Network, our next session is, I don't know, maybe next Thursday or the one after, whenever it is. Jump in, get yourself enrolled so that you can participate in that. Just some incredible conversations, kind of like this, but with 20, 30 of us at the one time, just chewing the fat about diversity and inclusion. So please feel free to sign up and join us, whether you're a diversity and inclusion professional or whether you're just an enthusiast and you're getting yourself into this space and want to learn more from others and from peers, then please sign up. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time. There's a few more episodes before the end of the year, and then I'm going to have a break. So tune into those. You can always check out any of these episodes and the back catalogue on the YouTube channel, so you can jump over there. Thanks, Sunitha, again, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you so much, Bree.